Hello everyone, my name is Ellie Hunter. Thank you, Daniel. I am a PhD student and a lecturer at the University of Kent, and I'm also a social worker, and I work in the field of adoption. My presentation is on the topic of mindfulness in British social work, exploring its use as a tool for managing practitioners' stress and how Buddhist teachings might be integrated into this secular profession to enhance relationships and reduce suffering. So, in the UK, social workers work with some of the most vulnerable people in society, and that includes the elderly, people with disabilities and mental health difficulties, and also children and families. Social work is considered one of the most stressful professions, and that's due to high caseloads, the emotional and complex nature of the work, and the high-stakes interventions. As such, social workers are vulnerable to burnout, which impacts their mental health and their emotional well-being, and also the efficacy of social services. Particularly since 2009, unfortunately due to serious social work failings, 2 children tragically lost their lives. And since that time, British social work has placed an emphasis on social workers growing their emotional resilience in order to manage their own stress levels. And from 2012, mindfulness began to be discussed and then practiced in British social work as a means to reduce social workers' stress and enhance their well-being. So it's important to note that British social work identifies as a secular profession, and when academics first began to consider how mindfulness could be applied to social work, they were careful to distinguish it from any religious practice. So I just wanted to think with you for a moment about the definitions of mindfulness that are used in British social work. I have a couple here. So Grant and Kinman talk about mindfulness as moment-to-moment awareness or paying attention to the moment without judgment. And Maddox cites Kabat-Zinn, the awareness that emerges through paying attention, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally to the unfolding of experience moment by moment. So you'll notice that these secular definitions of mindfulness, and indeed many similar definitions from this time, focus on the process or mechanism of mindfulness, where to place one's attention, without any thought to the underlying ethical intentions of the practice. So a Buddhist teacher told me that mindfulness is in and of itself ethically neutral, and he gave the examples of a cat hunting a mouse who needs to be mindful, and also a scientist who's creating a nuclear bomb has to be mindful in his actions, but these are not positive ethical uses. So there are some criticisms of mindfulness in social work because of this. It is said that used outside of an ethical framework and in place of structural solutions to issues of stress, mindfulness practice can actually make individual practitioners responsible for managing their own stress and suffering. And this can cause a sense of separation from others, increasing their suffering in the long run. Mindfulness has also been criticised as supporting neoliberal agendas. Purser and Lloyd describe the colonisation of mindfulness, reorienting the practice to the needs of the market rather than to a critical reflection on the causes of our collective suffering. So shortly after mindfulness began to be discussed in social work, in 2014 in the British Parliament, the Mindfulness All-Party Parliamentary Group formed to investigate the possibility of mindfulness-based interventions being included in public policy and explore the implementation of mindfulness in various different fields. This did not actually include social work, but did consider other public sectors, such as health and education. And the reason why I mention this is that a conversation that was had through these explorations was about the underlying ethical intentions of mindfulness. So they discussed Kindness and an inclination towards compassion are essential features of mindfulness. And also, mindfulness is attention and awareness, but also encompasses relationality and caring. It has the potential to add value and new degrees of freedom to living life fully and wisely, and thus to making wiser choices and healthier, more compassionate and altruistic choices. So until now, little discussion has been had in British social work about the ethical basis of mindfulness. But in recent years, however, there has been a turn towards Buddhism in British social work, even if only to understand how mindfulness works, so the mechanism of mindfulness. So Maddock et al. Have created a mindfulness program specifically for social workers. This is called the Mindfulness-Based Social Work and Self-Care Program. And the program focuses on reducing social workers' stress levels and enhancing their reflective practice. It's underpinned by Grabovak and al.'s 2011 Buddhist psychological model, which uses Buddhist teachings to understand the mechanism of mindfulness, which they say was previously left out of other mindfulness-based interventions. So they talk about how our habitual reaction is to pursue feelings that are pleasant and avoid those feelings that are unpleasant, and say that not being aware of this process can lead to mental proliferation or rumination, and mindfulness can disrupt this. Through cultivating equanimity, there is less attachment to transient sense impressions and mental events, and no reification of a sense of self. So this reference to Buddhist text, as I said, is mechanistic only. It's a way of understanding the process and effects of mindfulness. And it does not promote an understanding of the ethical foundation of Buddhism, as described in its teachings and texts. But it does represent a significant shift towards greater acceptance within social work of learning from Buddhist teachings, raising the possibility of openness towards reincorporating Buddhist ethical principles into mindfulness practice to further support and enhance social workers' relational skills. As my colleague was saying in our session earlier, Maggie, there's more to mindfulness than just relieving stress. So ultimately, social work is a relationship-based practice. And within Vajrayana Buddhism, mindfulness practice takes place in the context of relationship and benefiting all beings. This is just a little bit of information about some individual mindfulness practitioners in social work who are either Buddhist themselves or reflecting on some of the Buddhist teachings. So Chamberlain describes how his Buddhist practice and understanding of teaching support his social work practice. In his paper, he discusses Buddhist themes of interdependence, motivation, and compassion, and explains, an awareness of my own suffering has facilitated an awareness of the suffering of others. It leads to a logical and emotional understanding that we do not live in isolation from others, that our happiness cannot exist in isolation from others, and that focusing solely on our own happiness is essentially selfish. So as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, I am a social worker in adoption, and my role is supporting adoptive parents. So if you're not familiar with adoption in the UK, this happens when a court decides that a child's parents cannot keep them safe and well, so they must grow up in another permanent family with adoptive parents. Adoptive parents themselves face many challenges. It is a difficult process coming to adoption. There's lots to learn. And often adopters come having experienced loss, perhaps infertility or miscarriage, so they're often unable to have their own birth children. When they have a child placed with them, they have to learn how to build bonds with their adopted child who has suffered trauma, and that takes a special kind of therapeutic parenting. and also an ability to manage one's own emotions and self-regulation. In addition, they have to learn to work with birth parents. These will be the birth parents that, for whatever reason, were unable to look after their children. And this experience may have inflicted the trauma upon the child. So they have to learn to grow compassion towards these birth families and work alongside them. And for some adopters, this is a really, really tricky experience. They might hold a lot of anger, they might hold some jealousy. It can be a real challenge. So in my work, in my PhD thesis, I am exploring how an understanding of the ethical teachings of Vajrayana Buddhism might support adopters in meeting these challenges. And I'm looking at creating a mindfulness program specifically tailored to adopters in the UK. And to do that, I would like to incorporate an ethical understanding of mindfulness from Buddhist teachings. So such an approach might support adopters in navigating the inherent challenges of adoption, including that cultivation of compassion and understanding towards birth families, and indeed all individuals involved in the adoption process. I feel that Buddhist teachings on interdependence, impermanence, loving kindness, and compassion are particularly poignant in the context of adoption and may act as an antidote to suffering. Some of the thoughts that I've had around the teachings that I might wish to include are reflecting on the kindness of the mother, viewing every sentient being as our own child, compassion practices such as exchanging or equalizing self with other, and of course stabilizing the mind through mindfulness meditation and self-regulating in order to support a dysregulated child. So I came here very much with the hope of learning from all of you, and if anybody has any thoughts on teachings that may be particularly helpful for adoptive parents, I would love to hear those thoughts. Okay, so I'm going to conclude here. My colleague, again, Maggie said this really eloquently in her talk earlier today, but relationships and the wish to reduce harm are at the centre of British social work practice. To date, studies in the application of mindfulness in British social work have been overwhelmingly focused on managing individual practitioners' stress, raising concerns that the practice might in fact disconnect social workers from wider support systems and making them solely responsible for managing this burden. Mindfulness, as we know, is so much more than a simple stress management tool. And within Vajrayana Buddhist teachings, mindfulness is deeply connected to the ethical intention of alleviating suffering, aligning closely with the values and aims of social work. Beyond supporting individual well-being in social work, mindfulness practice has the potential to grow compassion and strengthen human connection. And I would add that word that Maggie used, harmony, as well. And that's what I am hoping to do in my program. There's lots and lots of references, and thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.